For over 40 years, Attorney Chip Mix has experience in personal injury claims involving the most serious and catastrophic injuries. Helping victims injured at work, at home, or on the road is Attorney Chip Mix's mission. The law offices of Attorney Chip Mix is committed to representing clients with integrity and getting the compensation they deserve. This evening, Attorney Chip Mix discusses the legal issues that affect you most. This is Justice for You with your host, Attorney Chip Mix.
Welcome to Justice for You, where we talk about the things you need to know if you have been or are being deprived of justice. Tonight, we will discuss workers' compensation. We will discuss what it is, what it provides, and the part of it that is unfair to workers. And we will tell you the things you need to do if you or a loved one is injured on the job to obtain justice for you. Tonight I have one of my good friends with me, Kent Hunt, who will help us with our discussion. Kent, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, Chip, thank you for having me. I finished a 36-year career with the Alabama Department of Mental Health and retired from there. My last position there was the Associate Commissioner for Substance Abuse Services. As soon as I retired from there, I knew that I wanted to continue to be active in work, and I started searching around and happened to have come across a job opening in the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office, and that was the Director of Pretrial Diversion. Ms. Ellen Brooks, the District Attorney at the time, hired me for that job, and I worked with her for 2 years and have since, though, retired, and I am really retired this time. And I'm spending my time with my family and helping others as best I can. So thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. And so you have some experience in the courts.
Yes, yes, I do have a little experience with court workings. Yes, I do.
All right.
Chip, could you give us a little thumbnail sketch of your work career and your legal?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I was born in Montgomery, Alabama at St. Margaret's Hospital. It's no longer in operation, but that's where I came from. I was raised in Montgomery. I went to Auburn to undergraduate school and to the University of Alabama to law school. Since I graduated from law school, I've been practicing law in Montgomery. I've practiced here for about 40 years. In the first part of my career, I represented insurance companies and defendants in cases, corporations, and people who had been sued. But for the last 10 years, I've done nothing but represent plaintiffs. That is, people who need help because they've been injured or because they've been cheated or because someone has exercised bad faith toward them. So we do a lot of personal injury work, we do a lot of wrongful death representation, and we feel like we have an inside track because we know how the defendants and the insurance companies think.
Thank you, Chip. You've already mentioned that the topic we're going to discuss tonight is workman's compensation, but could you give us a summary of some of the important points we're going to cover tonight?
Absolutely. The most important point we're going to cover tonight is this hat, the 220 cap. You're probably wondering what in the world is a 220 cap, but it's a term related to workers' compensation. The Workers' Compensation Act requires that a person who has a partial disability only gets paid $220 a week for their disability if their disability is partial. So we're going to talk about this 220 cap and how it is so unfair to workers in this state and how it needs to be changed. Another thing we're going to talk about is the fact that the Alabama legislature and the Alabama State Bar are looking into ways we can improve the Workers' Compensation Act. This came about because a Jefferson County Circuit Judge had a case that was a workers' compensation case, and the lawyers for the injured party filed a contest to the constitutionality of the Workers' Comp Act because of this $220 cap. The contest was ruled by the judge in favor of the party that filed it. and the Alabama Workers' Compensation Statute was ruled to be unconstitutional. There is a provision in the Alabama Workers' Compensation Statute that says if one part of it is declared unconstitutional or invalid, the whole act is unconstitutional, invalid. So tonight we're going to discuss these things. When we come back, I'm going to tell you a story about one of our clients in a workers' comp case. And please know that we never give the true name of any of the parties in the litigation that we're going to be discussing. Tonight we're going to call the workers' compensation plaintiff LaDon, and we'll be talking about LaDon and his big truck accident when we come back on the break. You're watching Justice for You. Please come back and join us after the break. Hello, my name is Chip Nix. I'm here at the law offices of Chip Nix in Montgomery, Alabama. I want to tell you about a 20-year-old young man that we were able to help a few years ago. He lost his right hand in an industrial accident. We were able to provide a settlement for him that obtained two primary parts. The first thing we were able to do through the help of an artificial hand expert was to get him a bionic hand that really functions. And second, we were able to work with a financial company to provide, in addition to cash, $5,000 that will be paid to him on a monthly basis for the rest of his life. If you have a personal injury case, or if someone in your family has tragically been killed, call us. We will search for justice for you. Some people say personal injury law is all about the money. Well, they're right. It's about the money to provide a bionic hand to a young man who has lost one of his in an accident. It's about the money for a family who has lost a mother due to a drunk driver. Yes, for the law offices of Chip Nix, it is about the money. It's about the money to help people salvage a decent life from the wreckage of someone else's carelessness. Justice for You begins here.
For over 40 years, attorney Chip Nix has experience in personal injury claims involving the most serious and catastrophic injuries. Helping victims injured at work, at home, or on the road is attorney Chip Nix's mission. The law offices of attorney Chip Nix is committed to representing clients with integrity and getting the compensation they deserve. This evening, attorney Chip Nix discusses the legal issues that affect you most. This is Justice for You with your host, attorney Chip Nix.
Welcome back to Justice for You. Our topic this evening is workers' compensation and what it could mean for you if you are injured on the job.
Chip, before the break, you said you were going to share with us a story of a client and his difficulties related to workman's compensation. Could you do that for us?
Yes, and ladies and gentlemen, please remember that we never use the real names of any of the parties that we talk about on the show. Tonight we're calling this gentleman LaDon. LaDon was a big truck driver. He drove tanker trucks that carried gasoline. He was driving his tanker truck south on 231, and another big truck came over into his lane going in the opposite direction and ran him off the road. He went down into a deep ravine and his truck turned over. Fortunately, the truck did not catch fire. People were able to get him out of the vehicle and rushed him to the hospital. But he had a serious low back injury. He had a serious neck injury. He had a serious knee injury, and he developed what we call PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, from the accident because of his fear that the truck was going to catch fire. So he had a hard time driving after that. As a matter of fact, He was out of work for an entire year. So what did workers' comp do for him? What did they pay him? Well, they paid him his medical expenses. Actually, they did not pay those to him. The workers' comp insurance carrier will pay the medical expenses directly to the provider. So, for example, when he was taken to the hospital, the workers' comp carrier paid the ambulance service. The workers' comp carrier paid the hospital. And when he came out of the hospital and went to an orthopedic doctor for his back, neck, and his knee injuries, they paid for all of that. They even paid for treatment with a psychiatrist for his PTSD. So all of his medical expenses were paid. Then the doctor declared him to be at what we call maximum medical improvement. This was after a year. He had already had neck surgery. Of course, workers' compensation paid for the neck surgery. He had already had a knee replacement, and workers' compensation paid for the knee replacement. So after he reached maximum medical improvement, the doctor gave him a 50% permanent partial disability rating, and he was paid on the basis of that permanent partial disability rating. But let's see a graphic. This is where things become very unfair. The 220 cap that we have discussed is the top that he can be paid on a weekly basis, even though his average weekly wage was greater than $1,000. If his average weekly wage was $1,000, he should get 66 2/3% of that average weekly wage every week while he cannot work after maximum medical improvement. He was paid that for his temporary total disability time when he could not work, but when he got the 50% disability rating, the 220 cap kicked in, and he could not get more than that. Therefore, his workers' comp payments were clearly inadequate for him.
Well, Chip, in a situation like that, who pays the difference between the two?
That's a great question, because somebody should pay the difference. But this is the problem. The employer is not required to pay the difference. The employer pays only the $220 a week, which is totally inadequate. This is the reason. The workers' comp statute says that the employer is immune from suit, that there is immunity that applies to the employer. That's like getting a vaccination so that you don't get smallpox. The statute vaccinates the employer against being sued in any way except for workers' compensation benefits. But Kent, there are ways that that we were able to help LaDon obtain more in the way of compensation, and that's called a third-party case. It is not under the workers' comp statute. It is a regular lawsuit, and it was against the trucking company and the driver that ran him off the road. That driver crossed the center line and came over and ran him off the road. So he was able to get adequate compensation because of that third-party case.
But if it had not been for the third-party case, the immunity would have protected the employer against any follow-up.
That's right. You cannot sue the employer for anything but workers' compensation benefits unless certain exceptions apply. And there are exceptions that apply, and we will talk about those exceptions next week.
Why for our understanding, the viewers and myself, why would employers contest claims that are filed by employees?
Well, there are a lot of reasons that they do contest the claims. Let me just give you an example of one of those reasons. LaDon had arthritis in his knee before he got injured. The workers' comp carrier tried to say that his knee replacement had nothing to do with the injury and the wreck, and of course it did. The The knee replacement was required because the wreck aggravated the injury to his knee and accelerated his need for a knee replacement. But that's one way workers' comp carriers and employers try to get around paying people. There are a lot of other ways that they do that.
It seems to me, though, that there's a lot that's unfair about, you mentioned being unfair before, but there's a lot that's unfair about this. Are there any actions that are being taken to help correct the unfairness in regard to workmen's compensation?
There absolutely are. I explained in the first segment about a case in Birmingham in Jefferson County where the circuit judge declared the workers' compensation statute unconstitutional because of the $220 cap. That case has now been settled, but because of that case, the state bar, the Alabama State Bar, appointed a task force of people that are studying the workers' compensation law, and they are going to make recommendations to the legislature with respect to what to do. For example, they're studying the unfairness of the $220 cap. This is the reason it's so unfair. That cap, $220, was established in 1987 by the legislature. That's 30 years ago. 30 years ago, they said $220 is the most a person with a partial disability can get on a long-term basis. They did not tie the $220 cap to anything like the Consumer Price Index. If they had done that, the $220 cap would have risen over the course of 30 years to keep up with inflation and price increases.
Who would be opposed to improvements in regard to those items you just talked about? Who would be opposed to that?
The employers, to some degree, may be opposed. The insurance carriers, in some regards, may be opposed. Let me give you an example of what's going on right now in the negotiations with respect to what the recommendations will be to the legislature for amending the Workers' Comp Act. Number one, they're talking about changing the length of time that medical expenses will be paid. Right now, if you get hurt on the job, you get your medical expenses paid right now and in the future, no matter how long away from the original injury those expenses occurred. You simply have to show that the expenses were caused by the workers' comp injury. What the employers and the insurance companies want to do is to limit that amount to 2 years. Instead of saying you get lifetime medical, they want to say you only get it for 2 years. And we think that's not the right thing to do, but the employer's greatest expenditure in workers' compensation by far is the payment of medical expenses. One of the reasons for that is the $220 cap. They haven't had to pay a lot of money to injured workers with a partial disability because of that, but they do pay medical expenses for life, although they argue about that frequently.
So the task force is currently considering options to improve workmen's compensation. Are they still in the process of doing that?
They're still in the process of doing that. As a matter of fact, the recommendations from the Alabama State Bar Task Force have not been filed yet. So we really don't know what those recommendations are, but we hope they will change the $220 cap. And there are a lot of ways they can change it. They can create a new amount and tie it to an index, or they can do away with a cap at all and just allow for 2/3 of the average weekly wage to be paid. When we come back, I will try to tell you about some of the points that you can take into consideration in protecting yourself. We're going to a break right now. This is Justice for You, where we talk about the things you need to know if you are being denied justice. We'll see you right back. Hello, my name is Chip Nix. I'm here at the law offices of Chip Nix in Montgomery, Alabama. I want to tell you about a 20-year-old young man that we were able to help a few years ago. He lost his right hand in an industrial accident. We were able to provide a settlement for him that obtained two primary parts. The first thing we were able to do through the help of an artificial hand expert was to get him a bionic hand that really functions. And second, we were able to work with a financial company to provide, in addition to cash, $5,000 that will be paid to him on a monthly basis for the rest of his life. If you have a personal injury case, or if someone in your family has tragically been killed, call us. We will search for justice for you. I'm attorney Chip Nix, host of Justice for You. Justice for You applies not only to the clients we serve, but also to the community. At nixattorney.com, we provide answers to questions about personal injury with direct access to me and my associates. If you've been injured, contact me at 334-279-7770. Justice for You starts here. Hello, we're back with Justice for You.
Chip, I don't know about the viewers, but for me, workman's compensation seems a lot more complicated than I thought it was. I can understand the 220 cap problem, but I wonder though what our viewers could do to protect themselves to make sure that they receive justice when they're dealing with a workman's compensation issue.
Well, that's a great thing, and I want to be sure our viewers know that because workers' compensation insurers and employers are trying to save money. They're trying to make sure that what they pay is deserved. They're trying, frankly, to make sure they pay as little as they can to satisfy their obligations under workers' comp, and in some cases they don't even care whether they satisfy their obligations. For example, I told you about LaDon's knee, that he had arthritis in the knee before the injury. Well, they will raise that and try not to pay you for the knee injury or the knee replacement. So pre-existing conditions is one of the things that they will raise. I had another client named Tamika who was injured at a hamburger place while she was working there. She was outside in the play area of the hamburger place trying to help some children, and she twisted her knee out there. The hamburger place tried to say that she was not doing her job when that happened. She was doing something entirely different from her job. We were able to convince them that they were not right about that, but they raised that. They said, well, you weren't doing your job. The other thing they raised was they said she failed to report the injury to them, which was really strange because they called the ambulance to come pick her up. They knew about the injury. They tried to say she did not report the workers' comp injury. Another situation is a young man that developed carpal tunnel syndrome, which is what we call a repetitive stress injury. He worked on an assembly line, and he worked with his fingers and his hands, and he developed what we call carpal tunnel syndrome. Well, he tried to report that to his employer, but they refused to take the report. And then they claimed that he developed the carpal tunnel syndrome after or before he claimed that he had been injured on the job. So they do a lot of things that they can do to try to prevent payment. So these are the things you need to remember. Please remember this. Be sure to report the injury. In the case of the young man on the assembly line, he was obligated by company procedure to report his injury to his supervisor on the line. Well, the supervisor continued to refuse to report it for him. So finally, he kept persisting, and he reported it, and he was able to get the report into the Human Resources Department. So report the injury, be persistent about it, ask for medical care. Another thing you need to do is make notes about what is going on. Make notes. For example, when you report it, write down the date you reported it, write down the date the injury happened, write down who you talked to, write down everything you can about what happened when you reported it. It's very important. Don't be afraid to report an injury. Some people are afraid because they think they will be fired for reporting the injury. And to be honest with you, sometimes that happens. But the Alabama Workers' Compensation Statute has a provision in it that prohibits an employer from firing a person solely for reporting a workers' compensation claim. So don't be afraid of reporting it. You really need to report it. You do have protection by the statute if you do report it. And know this, like in LaDon's case, we were able to get LaDon an additional sum of money through a third-party case. That is, a case against the truck that ran him off the road. So know that and understand that there are a lot of time-sensitive materials that your lawyer will need to obtain. For example, the first thing we do in a case like that is send what we call a spoliation letter. We send a letter to the party at fault saying, don't change anything about that truck you were driving. Keep the records on the driver that you have. Keep his log. Keep all of the maintenance records. Keep all of the repair records. We do that to protect you. Call us if you have a situation like that. Call the Alabama State Bar and call your legislator to report to them that you think the $220 cap needs to be changed and that you think workers' compensation benefits need to be improved for workers because they are very, very inadequate. So Kent, thank you for being my guest tonight. That's all we have time for. We hope that you will join us again on Sunday nights after the news at 10. If you've been injured in an accident or at work, call me at 334-279-7770. Have a good night. Thank you very much.